An open letter to Matt Dillahunty by the members of the Vegan Atheist Forum. This three-part video attempts to address Mr. Dillahunty's arguments and fallacies as presented on the Atheist Experience TV Show. In this, the first part, we start by addressing his rejection of the scientific consensus. Dear Matt, you have expressed in the past your relative indifference to the issues of the treatment of non-human animals, and we understand this apathy. For you, humans come first, and that's very understandable. If you don't care about something, we can't make you care. We neither expect you to go vegan, nor intend this letter to have that effect. This letter is not about animals, nor is it about veganism. This is about your bad arguments made in defense of your eating meat. Bad arguments that are hypocritical in light of your claims to respect science and intellectual honesty, which is something you should certainly care about. In this letter, we hope to help you in recognizing the flaws in your reasoning. We would encourage you to, at least, take a look at Dawkins' words on this subject in the future. Although he is not a vegan or vegetarian, he recognizes that speciesism is wrong and he has no moral justification for eating meat.
I think you have a very, very strong point when you say that anybody who eats meat has a very, very strong obligation to think seriously about it. And I don't find any very good defense. I find myself in exactly the same position as you or I would have been, well, probably you wouldn't have been, but I might have been 200 years ago, talking about, 200 years, perhaps a bit longer ago than that, talking about slavery, where somebody like Thomas Jefferson, a man of very sound ethical principles, kept slaves. It was just what one did. I mean, it was the kind of the societal norm. Well, the historical precedent of slavery, I think, is actually rather a good one, because there was a time when it was simply the norm. Everybody did it. Some people did it with gusto and relish. Other people, like Jefferson, did it reluctantly. I would have probably done it reluctantly, and I've sort of just gone along with what society does. But I think it's extremely hard. It was hard to defend then, yet everybody did it. And that's the sort of position I find myself in now. And I think what I'd really like to see is people like you having a far greater effect upon, I would call it consciousness raising, really, and try to swing it round so that it becomes the societal norm not to eat meat.
This letter is primarily in response to your arguments on a not terribly recent episode of the Atheist Experience, number 583, from December 2008. We fully recognize that this may, by now, be a straw man, and your positions may have evolved. But due to your reluctance to comment on or discuss the issue, it's hard to find an updated record of your view on this, so we're going by what we have. Point 1. Overtly rejecting scientific consensus based on personal ignorance of science.
My stance is that it is unhealthy. I mean, if you look on the American Heart Association's website, they have numerous instances where they list that diets that contain meat are more unhealthy than plant-based diets.
I simply don't believe it remotely, and it's I can answer it with one word, evolution. We evolved as an omnivorous species.
Matt, it doesn't matter what you believe. It matters what the actual evidence shows. You should know this better than almost anyone. You are neither an expert on nutrition nor even evolution, and you do much better when you admit, in humility, your lack of scientific background. It's not an appeal to authority to trust expert consensus on scientific matters. Expert opinions are important because novices do not have the training, experience, or time to understand all of the data. If you choose to ignore the scientific consensus, then you're going to have to come up with some very strong evidence from peer-reviewed research and literature. Is this not what you ask creationists to do whenever they choose to reject the scientific consensus on the age of the Earth or evolution? Speaking of creationists, let's take a look at the case of evolution versus creationism. There are droves of theists who think they understand evolution and physics well enough to offer the one-word checkmate of two-lot, second law of thermodynamics, as if nobody had ever thought about it before them. As it turns out, That mistaken perception of a contradiction between the two is based on a profound ignorance of both subjects. Your claims here are no less ignorant, and will explain why at the end of this section. But the most pressing matter is that you attempt to make them at all, considering your own criticism of creationists for pulling the same kind of intellectually dishonest nonsense. This is a very unfortunate hypocrisy. Both are cases of people attempting to debunk one science that they personally dislike by appealing ignorantly to some other science, with only passing familiarity by pointing out a perceived contradiction. A contradiction which doesn't actually exist, and if it did, you would have to admit that the other option is that evolution is false. Are you really ready to make that assertion? To discount the expert opinion of every major body of scientists on the subject in the world, along with irrefutable evidence which they conveniently ignore in favor of their own preconceptions. There is no difference here, except there is a good explanation for creationists showing this behavior. Their indoctrination prevents them from accepting scientific consensus. You have supposedly found your way out of the religious dogma and embraced science, however counterintuitive it might be sometimes. However, when it comes to the consumption of meat, you dismiss scientific consensus in an awfully trivial manner. What justification do you appeal to that makes scientific consensus important for the theory of evolution, the Big Bang, or even heliocentrism, but casually dismissible in favor of your own preferences when it comes to whether or not meat is good for you? To come back to the actual point in question, it's not just the American Heart Association that agrees that consumption of meat is a major factor in the development of heart disease. For the others, here's a short list of citations and links. It has been established beyond a reasonable doubt that lowering definitely elevated blood cholesterol levels, specifically blood levels of low-density lipoprotein cholesterol, will reduce the risk of heart attacks caused by coronary heart disease. This has been the consensus for 30 years and continues to be today. It's non-controversial among experts. The only people challenging this are conspiracy theorists, like the International Network of Cholesterol Skeptics, which is a group primarily composed of various lobbyists for the meat industry. They're essentially the dietary version of climate change skeptics. They offer no alternative to the lipid hypothesis, and their contributions are regularly debunked by actual experts. They are, however, very popular among the meat-eating public, particularly with the current paleo-fad dieters, who want to be reassured that there's nothing wrong with their saturated fat-rich diets, just as creationists welcome any reassurance that evolution goes against science, no matter how dishonest. This is an instance where you have to recognize your biases and realize that when you're hearing something you really want to hear, however true it may ring for you, that doesn't make it so. Follow the actual evidence and you'll arrive at the correct conclusion, which is likely the scientific consensus, because that's what the scientists do. We shouldn't even have to address your arguments about evolution, because the science should speak for itself. When there is an apparent conflict between two proven facts, that usually only indicates some degree of ignorance in the person observing the conflict, and not an actual contradiction. This should have been your assumption, and rather than make these claims, you should have tried to figure out why these two sciences seem to contradict each other. To anthropomorphize evolution in an effort to explain, evolution doesn't care if you have a heart attack at 40, because by that time it's done with you. Here's how Dawkins explains it. Obviously, lethal genes will tend to be removed from the gene pool, but equally obviously, a late-acting lethal will be more stable in the gene pool than an early-acting lethal. A gene that is lethal in an older body may still be successful in the gene pool, provided its lethal effect does not show itself until after the body has had time to do at least some reproducing. For instance, a gene that made old bodies develop cancer could be passed on to numerous offsprings because the individuals would reproduce before they got cancer. On the other hand, a gene that made young adult bodies develop cancer would not be passed on to very many offspring, and a gene that made young children develop fatal cancer would not be passed on to any offspring at all. If meat causes cancer, diabetes, cardiovascular disease, Alzheimer's, or erectile dysfunction before reproduction, Surely we would either evolve to stop the development of these diseases so early or to not eat meat. As we have evolved to be able to eat meat, either meat rarely causes these diseases before the age of reproduction, or we have evolved to delay the effects. However, this does not matter. The facts of the matter is that A. These diseases occur after the age of reproduction, therefore have no effect on evolution. And B. These diseases are caused by meat consumption, although not exclusively, primarily so. A diet of animal products will see you through reproduction, and that's all it had to promise to our ancestors, and that's clearly all it does for us. If you plan on living longer than that, you might want to actually look at the evidence in a modern context. Meat is also healthier than starving to death, and it's healthier than malnutrition, and for people hundreds of years ago, or in the third world, the situation is different. But you are not in the third world, and you live in a time in which one can be quite healthy on a vegan diet. No longer concerns about B12, for example. You should realize that health and ethical matters are highly situational. If the environment requires it, humans even eat each other, and it's both healthy and ethically permissible compared to starving where self-preservation is at issue. You would do well to go on a mostly vegan diet for your own health, just as anyone could be advised to stop smoking or drinking in excess. We don't really want to see you follow Christopher Hitchens, peace and blessings of Darwin upon him, in digging yourself an early grave. A diet high in fiber and low in saturated fat, plant-based, can reduce the prevalence of cancer admirably, and the same diet can help with diabetes, an illness we are sad to hear you suffer from. For more information, you could check out the numerous studies published by Harvard University or this article. That said, is it immoral to cause yourself harm? Maybe not, but there is an important ethical bottom line, and that is where the evaporation of your health excuse is very relevant. From a utilitarian perspective, it may be permissible to cause some harm to others if that harm results in a greater good, such as possibly harming animals to benefit humans. Medical testing is a great example. This seems ultimately to be the argument you're appealing to, with a health benefit approach. Even vegans generally accept legitimate health reasons for using animal products that are accepted by science as necessary and useful to promoting or preserving health. Although views on medical testing vary, that's another issue. This is a reasonable argument, provided there is a real benefit. There are issues of which is greater, the harm or the benefit, but these are admittedly hard to weigh. That makes it more of a moral gray area when there is both harm and benefit involved. But when, as happens to be the case with meat, in our privileged first world context where we do have other superior options, we're dealing with a lose-lose scenario, both harmful to the animals and our own health. This is no longer a gray area, and it is no longer rational to advocate the practice. If you manage to find some victimless way to harm yourself, there's some argument to be made that you're not doing anything wrong by it. But meat production today, in your reality, is not victimless. You aren't eating roadkill. You're not freegan, widely considered morally equivalent to veganism. You aren't eating lab-grown meat, and we have not developed farming practices and slaughter practices that are ethical. The fact of possible or hypothetical exceptions doesn't excuse the reality. Until one or more of those things changes, your action of eating meat is personally indefensible. Not for people in the third world or hundreds of years ago, but for you today. Not people in the 31st century eating meat grown in a glass jar, but you today. Not the fictional characters in The Hitchhiker's Guide eating that pig that was genetically engineered to want to be eaten, but you today. We're not saying don't eat meat. We can't tell you what to do. We're just saying it's wrong. Wrong for everybody throughout the universe in all space and time? No. Wrong for you today in your privileged first world country in an age of scientific enlightenment where we have the know-how to produce better, healthier food and the methodology to prove it. You're engaging in an irrational lose-lose behavior that is not even close to being a moral gray area. But worse yet, you're being intellectually dishonest when you defend it. Don't forget to check out parts 2 and 3 of this open letter to Matt. This letter in its entirety can be found on TheVeganAtheist.com. If you would like to see a response from Mr. Dillahunty, please consider sharing this video with others on Facebook, Twitter, and Google+, and perhaps it can be brought to his attention. The more exposure this video receives, the more likely Matt will notice them and feel compelled to respond. Looking for a great place to communicate with vegans, atheists, theists, and non-vegans from across the globe? Consider joining the Vegan Atheist Forum. Our growing community is always looking for new members with whom we can share our experiences, debate issues, discuss, and learn from each other. This letter is the first forum collaboration, so if you would like to be a part of future projects, find us at theveganatheist.com/forum.